You got to move. You got to move. You got to move. You got to move. You got to move, child. You got to move. You got to move. 'Cause when the 18th chapter, I'm picking up now in verse 24 and going into chapter 19. They led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was still really early in the morning. But they did not want to enter into the praetorium so that they might not be defiled before eating the Passover. Now Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they answered, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have brought him to you." Pilate said to them, "Well, then judge him yourselves according to your own law." And those Judean leaders, they looked at him and they said, "Well, we're not permitted to put anyone to death." This, by the way, was so that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying the kind of death he was about to die. Pilate entered the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of Judah?" And Jesus answered and said, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others say this about me?" Pilate answered, "I'm not a Judean, am I? It's your own people, the chief priests of your own people who have delivered you up to me. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting that I might not be delivered up. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." And Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus said, "So you say that I'm a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who hears the truth hears my voice." And Pilate said, "What is truth?" Having said this, he went out again to speak to the gathered Judeans and said to them, "I find no guilt in this man. But you have a custom that I should release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you this king of the Jews?" And they cried out, "Not this man, but rather Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was an insurrectionist. So Pilate took Jesus and had him scourged. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns, put it on his head. They arrayed him in purple clothes. They began to come up before him and, "Hail, King of the Jews," they would say, and smack him in the face. And then Pilate came out and said, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." And Jesus therefore came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe that the soldiers had thrown on him. And Pilate said, "Behold the man." Now when the chief priests and the others saw this, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said, "Well, why don't you crucify him yourself? I haven't found any guilt in him." And the crowd answered, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Now when Pilate heard this, he became somewhat afraid, and he went back into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus didn't answer. Pilate said, "You don't speak to me? Don't you know I have authority to release you or authority to crucify you?" And Jesus said, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, the one who delivered me up to you has the greater sin." Well, as a result of this, Pilate made another effort to release Jesus, but the crowd just kept crying out, "If you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." And with these words, then, Pilate just brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at a place which is called the Pavement. In Hebrew, that's Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the crowd there, he said, "Behold your king." And they said, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests, they said, "We have no king but Caesar." So Pilate then delivered Jesus to be crucified. And they took Jesus, therefore, and went out. He went out bearing his own cross to the place called the Skull, which in Hebrew is Golgotha. And they crucified him there, along with two others, one on either side, Jesus in between. And Pilate wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. The inscription said, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Judeans." This inscription was there for many to read, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So Wendy and I were having lunch today. We'd gone out to eat lunch, and I was putting some hot sauce on my food. And she said, "You remind me of Hugh." He was an old friend of ours. He'd been a member of a church that I had served, and he's a fun, interesting guy. And his wife, Sarah, they were just really nice people. Hugh always carried a bottle of hot sauce with him wherever he went. And he would sometimes order hot food at restaurants and then complain it wasn't hot enough and have to put more hot sauce on it. And he told me once about a story once where he was, it was some kind of peppered steak or something that he'd ordered, or steak with a pepper sauce. And they were like, "How hot would you want it?" And he said, "Really hot." It came out, it wasn't hot enough, and it became like a contest between him and the chef to see if the chef could make it hot enough for Hugh to go, "Ooh, this is good." So, but it was funny that he came to mind, because I always think of Hugh this time of year, because we were in Lent, and so I was doing one of those things where you have lay people do like a sermon each Wednesday night during Lent, and they were taking different characters around the cross, and Hugh got the character of Pilate. Now, he had been in the military, he had been in Vietnam, and he was in a weird division where it was hearts and minds. They were like the ones who would go in and try to build cities and stuff. And I said, or not cities, but towns, and put up some, help them with a well or whatever. I said, "You guys probably saw no action then." He's like, "Just the opposite. They were prime target." So he had this perspective of what it's like to be kind of in a position of authority, occupying in a country where a lot of the people don't want you there, and there's an insurrectionist movement happening. And so he had Pilate, and he summarized Pilate in a sentence that to me, it's the most memorable sentence I've ever heard about Pilate. And he just stood up, he's getting ready to do a sermon, he looks out at us and he goes, "It was a perfectly good day to kill a Jew in Palestine." And I went, "Oh, that's who it is. He nailed him." That's what this guy is about. And that's important, because one of the things that happened in the history of the church is that because the church was exposed to a lot of Roman persecution, it kind of wanted to be careful about saying anything that could be used against them in a court of law, that would give the Romans more excuse to harm them beyond what they were being harmed. So a lot of times when people read the scripture, they're kind of like, it kind of looks like we're trying to let Pilate off the hook here a little bit. The crowd is forcing him into it. He's trying to release him. And they're like, no, we won't take him. We'll take the other guy. That is not what's going on, okay? Do not for a second imagine that poor Pontius Pilate is just like, "Oh, they're forcing me to do this." It is a perfectly good day to kill a Jew in Palestine. But Pilate, he's got the job of maintaining the Pax Romana. He's got the job of making sure that there's no more insurrections. And there have been insurrections going on at this point for about 25 years. One after another. They've been put down by different proconsuls. He's been proconsul for less than a decade. When he became the proconsul, or the whatever of Judah, he was originally garrisoned in a city called Caesarea. Now, Caesarea was a Roman city. I mean, it's even named for Caesar. So it's not a Jewish town. It was built as a Roman city. And so there, of course, he would have all of the statues of Caesar and all of the things adorning and celebrating the gods of Rome. And he decided to move the garrison from there over to Jerusalem, probably because it was a lot shorter distance to go and put down pesky insurrections. So he brings his troops over, and of course they have to have a parade because you can't just relocate. You and I, we just moved to a new place. It's just moving. But when an army moves, it's a parade. So they had to do, and their flags and their banners. And he comes in with all of the idols and the statues of Caesar to put them up and to display them in their sacred places. And he does. He actually puts them up. I don't think he put anything in the temple. I think they were good at not doing that. But he puts all this stuff up, and the Jewish community goes, they freak out, right? All of these devout, from the multiple sects of what we today call Judaism, the multiple sects of Israelite religion that were right there in that town, because you had the Baptists, and you had the John the Baptist followers, you had the Essenes, you had the Sadducees, you had the Pharisees, you had the Hellenistics, you had all of these people, and they protested. They went to Pontius Pilate, and they basically had a protest, basically peaceful protest, in front of Pilate, begging him to take this stuff down. And Pilate was like, I'll show these guys. He has his army, like his troops are kind of hiding. They're around, just out of sight. And he's like, this is how it's going to be. And they're like, no, it can't be this way. This is intolerable to us. Right? It's one of our commandments, no graven images. You can't have an idol of any kind. And Pilate goes, oh yeah? Gives the signal, his troops come out, and they surround the crowd. And they're still saying, we can't have any idols. And Pilate gives the next signal, oh yeah, and out come the swords, and the spears drop. How about I just kill you all then? And they said, fine, we'd rather die than have idols in our city. And Pilate was like, whoa. Now, I don't know if he was just impressed by their courage, or if he was just, is the word superstitious the right word? I'm not sure. But if he was just, I'll use the word superstitious. If he was just superstitious enough to worry that maybe there was a local deity who would cause him trouble if he, got out of line. And so he'd said, oh, okay, I'll move him back here. And he brought them back over to where the troops were garrisoned instead. So that's one story about Pilate. But there's another story about him that is in roughly the same time frame. It sounds like it comes just before the crucifixion of Jesus, but right in there. And what happened was they needed water. The city of Jerusalem had a water source that had worked very well, but the city was getting bigger, and then they needed more water. So he built an aqueduct. And it came time to pay for the aqueduct. So he decided to just raid the temple treasury for the money. He's like, these guys got money, and we needed this work done, so you're paying for it. And again, because this money had been given to the temple, it was considered sacred, and then everybody freaks out again, and they have a protest, and they all gather in front of Pilate to complain. But Pilate, at this point, he has his people mingle in with the crowd, dressed like them, but they've got their clubs and their knives at the ready, and when he gives the signal, they whip them out and start killing people. And a lot of people were killed that day or beaten up or smashed, and he just dispersed the crowd, and that was the end of that. They had their water, and it was paid for. So this guy is an interesting fellow. He's not a person, he's more than happy to use force when necessary, when it seems appropriate to him. I can't tell for sure why he hesitates, but I'm going to suspect that he's got a little bit of a hint that maybe something supernatural, because we hear that a little bit in John. Like he decides to take the icons out of Jerusalem because of their complaint and the religious willingness, and not just because he thought they were really brave, but because he was worried. Because when he hears that Jesus is, this guy says he's the Son of God, right? When the high priests are telling him this, he's afraid. He says he became afraid, and he comes in, Jesus, where do you come from? He wants to know, is this guy really some kind of supernatural being? He's a little bit concerned about this. He's concerned for his own neck, of course. You understand this, because he's predominantly just a political being. He's a combination soldier-politician. That's what this guy is. And And his questioning of Jesus, is not, he's not a sympathetic figure who's being noble and careful. He's a guy who's testing the wind. That's his whole thing, testing the wind. He says, you got accustomed to release a prisoner? I can release this guy or somebody else. And they're like, yeah, give us Barabbas, which means that they're thinking in terms of, this is already there. He's clearly trying to figure out what's going to make his life the easiest, what's going to keep the peace. And that's where he's at. He's like, okay, whatever. That's his attitude. It's not until this thing about being divine, of being having some kind of supernatural background. Remember, we hear Son of God and we think about our theology, only begotten Son of the Father, right, through whom all things were made. That's how we think. But the word Son of God is a common term in the Greco-Roman world. Like Hercules was a son of God because he had a human parent and a divine parent, one of the Olympian gods and a human mother, I think. And so is Achilles, and so is, there's this whole list of these guys who are considered, demigods is the term that you and I use, but the term they would use is son of God. So if a person is a son of God, that means that they've got, that you don't want to mess with them. Don't mess with them. They could be dangerous. And he has lots of stories to go on because he's a Roman and he's heard the stories. So he's concerned about this. Where do you really come from? And it's kind of be a little terrifying when Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. You're like, okay. But after he's questioned Jesus twice, had him beaten, which, by the way, would be normal. They would just, Romans might beat somebody just for, oh, you're innocent, but you still got arrested and wasted my time. Beat him anyway. That was just normal for them. But after he's done all of these things that are kind of just typical Roman judicial practice, and he's determined that Jesus really might be nuts, but he's not guilty of a capital crime, he tries to get him released. He says, okay, well, I don't find any guilt in this guy. So if you want to lynch him, that's on you. And their response is a political response. We have no king but Caesar, and everyone who says that they're a king commits treason against Caesar. It's a political answer. All right, so you get this really interesting history stuff, but here's what I find fascinating. Right in the middle, there was that weird little text where Jesus says, you would have no authority over me if it wasn't given to you from above, and therefore the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin. And you hear that and you're like, huh? What is this? Is the gospel writer trying to let Pilate off the hook? Because, you think the one who handed me over, first thought would be Judas, and the second thought is, and this is actually what I think it is, Caiaphas, the high priest. So what Jesus is saying is, at this point, you've just been operating standard operating procedure. You've been doing the normal stuff. The guilt is not on you, but on the high priest who handed me over to you. That's what Jesus is saying. But don't think that's a blanket exoneration. Because Caiaphas knew when he hands Jesus over that this is not about a crime against their faith worthy of death. This is not about Jesus having committed a crime. This is about Caiaphas' fear about how Jesus' message and the excitement and enthusiasm of his followers has the potential to disrupt the delicate balance he's been trying for years to maintain with the Romans, with this guy who threatens to kill people sometimes and has in fact killed people. And it's like this, how do we keep this from getting out of hand? That's where Caiaphas is. That's what he's thinking. But he knows Jesus is innocent. He sees that as an expediency. And Caiaphas himself states it in the Gospel of John. He says it's better for one person to die than for the whole nation to be wiped out. And so he hands Jesus over knowing he's innocent. And now it comes Pilate's Friday. This is Pilate's Friday. This is the moment for Pilate. Because now once he knows that Jesus is innocent, yes, you can say, well, you had him beaten, you did all these bad things. That's just normal. It's once he knows that he's innocent. I find no guilt in this man. At that point, that's where things now are shifting. Pilate, the political creature, is making a decision, and his decision is a really straightforward one. He's like, okay, what is going to make my life the easiest? What is going to take care of this political moment? What should I do? How's it going to happen? And he's testing he's checking the breeze. He's trying to figure out what's going to keep the things calm enough that he's not going to have any problems. I mean, it's a bad time to have any kind of riot in Jerusalem because there's hundreds of thousands of people there for Passover. He's like, okay, how am I going to do this? What's going to be the best approach? What is it going to be? Are we ready? And he's checking that out. In other words, this guy is making a purely political decision about what is going to be the smoothest outcome to take. Is he going to go along to get along? He knows that the wrong thing could happen here. But is he going to say, well, for the sake of the peace, if we got to get these bad guys off the street and scoop them up and let's get them right out of here. And if we accidentally send an innocent man to another country and throw him in a notorious prison, but that's just one life compared to the value of getting them off at the street. It really, that's okay. Like if we want to get rid of the drugs, so we just shoot people in the street and kill them all. This is what happened in the Philippines, actually, not that long ago. And just throw them in jail, whether they're guilty or innocent. We don't care. If it even looks like they're selling drugs, we'll just get rid of them. Sure, we had to spill some blood, but that's what you have to do. All through the ages, the wise men and sages have said there are dirty deeds that simply must be done to keep society going and the benefits flowing. There's the simple necessity of hurting someone. That's Harry Chapin wrote that, right? That's the world, right? That's what the question is. So what are we going to do? Are we going to go along? Are we going to go with the crowd? Are we going to say, sure, no problem? Are we going to oppose them even if it's dangerous? Are we going to be like those folks who said to Pilate, we would rather die than do the wrong thing when it was about not having idols in Jerusalem in the temple? Or are we going to be like the ones who just kind of went along with the flow of the crowd going, yeah, crucify him, let's get rid of this guy? Are we going to be like Pilate who knows he's innocent but chooses instead to send him off to be crucified? Like Caiaphas, who knows he's innocent but sends him off to Pilate to ram him through a due process with a predetermined outcome? When our Friday comes, what will we choose for ourselves? And that's a scary thought, because it's a little bit scary right now. There are these questions that we ask. Should we be doing something, saying something? What happens if a neighbor of yours who's been in the country for a long time, but maybe came as a kid, and suddenly they found out immigration is coming for them, and they needed a place to hide? Would we let them come into our house? Would we become the Underground Railroad, or the folks in Holland who hid Jewish neighbors in their homes? I mean, we would do that, or would we go, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll pray for you? I mean, these are kinds of questions that are floating maybe in our future, and they're tough questions. And we don't, it's one thing to say, I think I would, when the time comes, I think I would blah, blah, blah. But I'm not always sure that's true. Because sometimes what we think we're going to do in the moment, when suddenly the pressure is on and we're being looked at and yelled at and pressured by others to act a certain way, even if we don't think it's right, it's hard to make that right choice. It's scary to make that right choice. And so my feeling about this is I read the story of Pilate, and I can't help but wonder, if I was in his shoes, what would I have done? When I am faced with the tough choices like that, what will I do? When that moment comes, may God have mercy. Can you find the prayer response? Please stand as we pray together. When Pilate's Friday came, he had to choose. He had to choose between the pressure of others and what he knew was right. He had to choose between political expediency and moral integrity. When Pilate's Friday came, he chose and became what he chose. When my Friday comes, how will I choose? Will I choose the path of least resistance or a harder, truer way? Will I choose a people-pleasing outcome or a lonelier action of love and sacrifice? When my Friday comes and I choose, who will I become? Merciful Savior, have mercy on me when my Friday comes. Amen. We'd love to have you join us for in-person worship Sunday morning at 8:30 at Christ United Methodist, or Sunday morning at 10:15 at Stanton United Methodist. And if Sunday morning is not your jam, join us Monday night, 6 o'clock at Christ United Methodist for Pizza Church. It's church, and then we eat pizza. Until next time, may the Lord God bless you and keep you. May the face of the Almighty be upon you, and may God grant you peace.